Okay. Can folks see that? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I sent out a sheet. You probably have the sheet, and we can put the sheet in the chat box for those that didn't have a chance to. And we'll go back to the sheet in a second. But I had been waiting for a friend of mine who is a local in the high desert near us. He's a Buddhist priest. He has the title of Sensei Jim Lakey, and we do some stuff together. We're chaplains together at the local hospital, and that's how we know each other. And whenever we do an interfaith prayer, he comes and he represents the Buddhist faith, or at least his type of Buddhism. And I'd asked him for a text. I found one that wasn't as good. I found an ancient Buddhist text, but this one is even better that I'd like to begin with here. And I realize this is not new for some people. I am not well versed in Buddhism. I'm not a Jubu or a Buju, as many friends of mine are. I didn't have that period of life, and it's always been a little bit of a glimpse. But one of the names that comes out for anybody who studies Buddhism, and I'll connect it all to our topic in just a moment. Okay, I just thought we'd start with this. Is Thich Nhat Hanh, who was a Vietnamese Buddhist monk who brought, more than anybody else, I think, the way I understand it, Buddhism to the Western world. He lived his last decades in France, in a place called Plum Blossom, I think, someplace like that. Is there anybody here? I can't see your pictures right now. If there's anybody here who knows more about this than me, just please speak up. But I was exposed to his books. They're the kind of books that when you go to the Buddhist shelf in a bookstore, there's a lot of his books, and they're very easy to read. And I found a lot of connections over the years to whatever I was doing, whether it was study or whether it was prayer, high holiday prayers, funerals, all sorts of things. And this is what Sensei Jim sent to me this morning. Right. So I asked him for sources that would connect to one of our prayers that talks about breath. So breathing in, I calm my body. Breathing out, I smile. Dwelling in the present moment, I know this is a wonderful moment. And all of us here who do meditate or have adopted different types of meditative techniques, we know just how focused it is on the breath. There's different ways of doing it and counting, different ways of letting your mind go or concentrating on something. All those things are possible, but it may be, I can't see right now, but Sylvia, why don't you read the second one for us?
Breathing. Yes. Thank you. Breathing. Breathing in. I know I'm breathing in. Breathing out. I know I'm breathing out. As my in-breath grows deep, my out-breath grows slow. Breathing in, I feel calm. Breathing out, I feel at ease. Breathing in, I smile. Breathing out, I release. Dwelling in the present moment. I know this is a wonderful moment.
We're going to go back to my screen share for some photographs that I didn't include. This is the strangest or the least organized of the this little project that we're doing. By the way, we're going to extend it one more week. I'll be speaking because we got off balance because of we spent so much of the first meeting on the war itself, which was very important for me, and I hope for you as well, to be able to speak and to hear others speak. The war continues, the death continues, the suffering continues, the fight for the image of Israel and the fight for the image of Palestinians who are not Hamas. It all continues swirling around. And yet we're going to take a breath right now. We're going to take a breath to try to let ourselves go a little bit. Release ourselves from whatever's been bothering us this morning or this day, wherever you are. And we as Jews, though, or those that have come to a Jewish collaborative gathering, we're going to go back 3 weeks to the Parshat HaShavua, to the Torah portion, and think of how in the second creation story, God breathed directly into Adam, who he had just made from the Adamah, from the earth. This clay golem. Life was breathed into him as that archetype of humanity in this story. And when you tell that story and pay attention, tell it to your children, your grandchildren, you pay attention. Then when you go through a little exercise of meditation with somebody who is talking about breathing, as Sensei Jim does, or as the sources do, as Thich Nhat Hanh does, as has been done in Buddhism, and I would imagine other faiths as well, for centuries upon centuries. We all breathe, but it's being mindful of the breath. And from here we get mindfulness, everything that comes with it, right? Sit down and breathe. All the things we know about getting oxygen to the brain and calming the nerves, all that is in the background. But as Jews, we go back to that story. Or I'd say we should be mindful. I would like to encourage people to be mindful, to go back to that story in Genesis and realize that this is a direct gift from God. We have lots of gifts from God, but they're all kind of indirect. The one that is most direct is our breath. Again, I don't pretend that this is new for everybody here. It certainly isn't new for the Or HaMidbar folks. Others of you, you've been in different places. It was new for me. All this talking about breath was very new for me in the 1990s. You know, I moved to Israel in 1975. I was Orthodox in my last 2 years of high school. I went into the army, I went to the yeshiva. Nobody was talking about breathing deep. Nobody was talking about meditation. Yes, I knew there were those that I grew up with, that I had heard had gone to live in ashrams and been attracted to Eastern or Asian religions. But I didn't know anything about it. It kind of intrigued me. On the other hand, there was something in my Orthodox soul, and we'll talk in a moment about the soul, the neshama, that said, oh, you shouldn't go there. Not to go there. There's a Buddha involved. I should have set up. I have a whole shelf of Buddhas that have been given to me over the years. So that one in particular that Sasha got me because she just said it looks so much like me. I'm going to get that one. Hold on. Mind you, we were in Bali, and Sasha said this looked like me, so she got it. Now, I only see one part of that that looks like me, and it ain't my head. But and somebody was in our house once, Father Franz, who I spoke about, Father Franz, and we had less of a collection of Buddhas in those days. But there were books on my shelf, and this is in the early 2000s, or no, maybe even late 90s. Yeah, early 2000s. There were already books on my shelf about Buddhism, Thich Nhat Hanh and Dalai Lama and other things. And he was very questionable about it. Father Franz, as a Roman Catholic, just couldn't wrap his head around why I would at all be interested in things that had to do somehow with idols. Now, we'll talk again in the hour to come about idols as well. We'll talk about Buddhism, we'll talk about breath, and we'll talk about how I hope we get to the last source is how Christianity, or certainly Trinitarian Christianity, Roman Catholicism, if nothing else, with icons and Eastern religions, with their idolatry, so to speak, the icons and the Trinity, if that is considered to be idolatry. But we'll leave that for the very end, and that'll be the segue into what we do next week, which will be my experiences in the last 8 years here in Palm Springs, with interfaith dialogue. So let's go now to the source sheet that I handed out, which begins with the prayer that I had said for decades, right? I began to say, I was 70s, 80s, even when I went to Hebrew University, my interest was in, if I was straying from Judaism and from Bible, it was in New Testament. It was in the Church Fathers. That was like, I was exposed then. Still was never. I was exposed to a little bit of Asian culture when I took some courses. I had to take some extra courses for my bachelor's degree. I took one in Introduction to Japanese Culture, so I learned a little bit about Buddhism then, about Shintoism. And but it wasn't really until the late 90s when I befriended Rabbi Levi Wyman Kelman, my really good friend and Chavruta study partner. Our kids, we founded together a school for our children, trying to fill a vacuum of pluralistic Jewish education in Jerusalem. It became Tali Beit Vagan. And our daughters were in the first class. That's our daughter Gabi, who lives in the Bay Area now. And I began coming to his when I could, when I wasn't at my own synagogue, visiting his synagogue, Kol Neshama, which some of you have perhaps been to in Jerusalem. And he had been exposed to a lot of Asian religions when he was in college going forward. He's the one who had suggested that I go to Taizé. He's the one from the story about Taizé, the monastery. And it's from him that I learned, I should have brought the Hebrew on the page, but how to enunciate the names, enunciate the words of Elohai, Neshama Shenatatabi, which is in our prayer book that many of you know. But I only brought it here in English. I apologize. I should have brought the Hebrew as well today. So, Sandy, would you read number one? This is what that many people know, Elohai. The background is it's a long version of Modeh Ani. They're really two versions of the same prayer. And for many, for at least part of the Jewish tradition, rabbinic tradition, this is what you say when you first get up, when you first awake. There's a parallel tradition that says, no, when you first awake, you hear the rooster crowing, so that you say the blessing, we could do that another time, but today we do this. Go ahead, Sandy.
The soul that you, my God, have given me is pure. You created it, you formed it, you breathed it into me. You protect it within me, and you will someday take it from my body and return it to me in the world to come. As long as my soul is within me, I give thanks to you, Adonai, my God and the God of my ancestors, Master of all creation, Lord of all souls. Praised are you, Adonai, restorer of souls to bodies that have died.
And so you may ask, how is this connected to the Buddhist passage that we started with? The passage that I found, the ancient is a little bit more distant to us in our own thinking and breathing. They're breathing in long. He discerns, I am breathing in long. This is from a quote from this is supposedly a quote from the Buddha about teaching the monks how to breathe in their meditation. Well, for those that haven't realized already, Elohai, that is my God, by the way, and not our God, not Eloheinu, Elohai. It's still the point in the morning where it's just us individuals opposite God, in the same way that we end in the traditional liturgy. Hamapil, there's a blessing called Hamapil, where we talk personally with God, Elohai. During the day, we're part of the collective. The very beginning of the morning, very end of the day, where it's just us in a very individual way with God, according to the traditional liturgy. But the next word is Elohai, Neshama. And Neshama, as you know, is soul, but it's also connected to the word Nishima, breath. And we go back to chapter 2 of Genesis, to that story where God breathes God's own breath into that first human being and gives us that gift of breath. And what Levi taught me, what Rabbi Wyman Kelman taught us is how to pronounce the Hebrew. Elohai neshama shenatata bi, ata vrata, ata yitzarta, not ata vrata, ata yitzarta, ata nefachta bi, which is the way perhaps we would have said it before. But there's a hey in the hey at the end of the word yitzarta, nefachta. Those words are hey mapik. That's the dot in the hey, which we're meant to actually pronounce in a different way than the hey otherwise. Again, I should have brought the Hebrew, but I don't want it to be dependent upon that. The whole point is that the way that it has been written, the poem, the prayer has been written, forces us to be aware of our breath. Ata nefachta bi, ata yitzarta, ata atid litla mimeni, ulachzira. That that's actually the way you're supposed to. Most Israelis don't speak that way. Some do who have been trained in grammatically trained when they're reading Torah. Good Torah readers read the Torah that way when there's a hey mapik with a dot in the hey. And that connection, Levi was the first, and Levi, of course, stayed very much in the Jewish side of it. There's plenty of people, and then I was eventually introduced to Reb Zalman Shlomi Schachter, who I was able to bring my students from Israel throughout the aughts to visit him in Boulder, Colorado, because we had a funder in Boulder who was interested in me bringing young Israeli rabbinical students and rabbis who were thinking out of the box to the Boulder Jewish community to help them with. We were helping each other, but Reb Zalman lived there, so we got to study with Reb Zalman, those that know the name, and each of the fellows had private audiences with him over the years. And of course, he's richly influenced by Asian religions, not just, but in particular. And so over the years, heard a lot of overlapping there, and it kind of wore down any kind of resistance I might have had growing up as a teen, Orthodox teen, and maybe less interested in the 80s. By the 90s, I was already interested. And when I came to the United States on fundraising trips, I would always look for those books and bring back usually a Thich Nhat Hanh. So I have a whole collection of them at home in a box someplace in the garage. So that's kind of the connection, and a very, very superficial, I admit. Not something I've delved in deeply. I enjoy speaking with Sensei Jim when I can. If I had other opportunities, perhaps I would. But that brings me to an event that happened in Jerusalem. It was probably the mid-aughts when the Dalai Lama came to Jerusalem, and I was part of a network of nonprofits, people that ran nonprofits. We were invited to a small gathering with him of a few dozens, less than 100 people, in this very small theater in Jerusalem. And I found there Sasha's first cousin, Michael, who I adore. We adore Michael and Evie. And Michael grew up Sasha grew up in Holland, but Sasha's aunt was ended up in Germany after the war. And she raised 2 children there. And Michael grew up in Germany, and then she moved to Israel towards the end of her life. And Michael did as well. And we became close with him, although Michael is absolutely secular. Of all the cousins, most of Sasha's cousins are Orthodox. Almost all of them are. But Michael is secular. And we took a liking to him. So I was just thrilled to see him. And we sat next to each other. But the 2 of us had 2 entirely different experiences. Again, I wanted the purpose of this mini course, and I say this to Matthew, to Luz, to Martin, to Jack, those that perhaps were not here in the first 2 meetings, is I was asked by Rabbi Marsha to share with the group some of my interfaith experiences over the last 20, 30 years. And I did a lot about Christianity, some about Islam last week. And then I still wanted to include at least a little bit about Buddhism and Hinduism, the little that I know, but still has had an effect on me. Because when people come to our prayers, very often people say, "Oh, you must be a renewal rabbi." Well, I know Reb Zalman, I've known other renewal rabbis, but in that we do silent meditation during the prayer. We do use different kinds of chants, and we're not necessarily so theocentric in our prayer. There's a lot of possibilities for people who are not talking about Adonai Elohei Yisrael to be comfortable in our prayer as well. And that comes from the influence to being open to those other traditions. So that's how we got here. And I'm back to the story. It's in the mid-aughts, and we go into this room, and somebody comes out and gives us an introduction that if you address, you have to say, "Your Holiness," or I forgot what it was, a whole list of things that you have to do. Perhaps some of you have also been in the presence of the Dalai Lama before. And frankly, it was quite exciting, right? I think I'd read a book. And anyway, we get there. And the first thing that happened to me when he came on the stage was I broke out in tears. Now, you may remember, and I think I emphasized it, that when I was first in Taizé and I sat down in the prayer and it was quiet, and then these 4,000 or 5,000 young people were in the church, just began singing according to the whatever the way that they did it there, I also broke out in tears. That's my reaction. My reaction to intense spirituality is to cry. It doesn't happen so much in Or Midbar these days because first of all, we're online, it's not intense. But those that remember the days that we did it in person, there's a lot more tears involved. It's just who I am. I'm proud of it. My mother, Serene, is a crier, and her mother, Leah, is a crier. So I often like to say I'm David ben Sipora bat Leah, because that's the lineage of crying in my family. And there's almost every wedding I do, I'm in tears when I'm connected to the couple, as I usually try to be. And many funerals I'm in tears at, which you might say is more accepted, although I don't know the people. In so many cases, I'm doing funerals out here in Palm Springs. I never met the person before, but there's something about the experience that, yeah, it's nothing I'm embarrassed about. I don't know, I should be proud of it, but it's something who I am. And when the Dalai Lama walked on the stage, he didn't even say anything. I was hit with this wave of tears. And so I understand my own reaction to something that's going on, which is beyond me, something spiritual energy. Again, this is not scientific. That's not what I'm bringing it up for. It's just who I am and what happens to me. And so I guess people would say I was blown away even before he opened up his mouth. And then he said a few words, and then people had questions for him. If His Holiness would say, please tell us, they kept repeating questions, variations of, how do we make peace here in the Middle East? How do we get along with the Palestinians? It was so many of them, although some of them would say, His Holiness might remember that I was in Dharamsala 20 years ago, those kind of, making it about them as well, which was, okay, that's eye rolling. But so many versions of this question, how do we make peace, apropos for today during a war? At some point he says, and I can't imitate him, but if you heard his voice, he's this little guy, and he's got this voice. He says, I think there's been some sort of mistake here. And so people laugh, of course. He says, I'm not a politician. And they laugh some more. He says, I'm just a monk. And they laugh. He says, no, I'm very serious. I'm not a politician. I'm a monk. I spend 85% of my time. This is my point. He said, I spend 85% of my time in meditation. That's what I do. And some people continue to laugh, and I totally got it. I totally understood that here's somebody whose strength comes from the spiritual practice that he's so involved in, he's so saturated in, that's what he emanates, if I'm using that word right. That's what he projects. And Brenda, is it possible for you to turn your screen? Because we're looking at you sideways, and I feel a little disoriented. Oh, now you're upside down. The other way? Okay. All right. Whatever works. And so, so I was thinking a lot about, and interesting, when we were going out, I said, Micha, what do you think? He says, I'm not so impressed. And I was like so disappointed, but Micha. And I understood. I said, Micha, you don't have a spiritual practice in no judgmental way at all. It's not what you do. You're an intellectual. All he does is help people. He's a therapist. He works in nonprofit organizations that do peace work in Europe, because his German is fluent. He's in Scandinavia a lot. He does really important work, super important work in the school system, working with nursery school teachers about Israeli Arab mixed nursery schools, and working with them on coexistence. It's super important work. But he's not a spiritual person now. He doesn't have a spiritual practice that he does perhaps in art or things, but not in that same way. And that got me thinking a lot about, so who is in our tradition, who are those people? Is there anybody here who ever met the Lubavitcher Rebbe or another tzaddik? Yeah, no. Okay, not that anybody's. I've met other tzaddikim, other admorim over the years, especially when I was younger. That is Hasidic rabbis, and some do have a very special aura to them, a very special feeling, and some don't. That's in how I was expected. But I wanted to look at what Rabbi Nachman. But Brenda, is there any way for you to turn your camera? It's there you go. Thank you. just that it's really disorienting. I appreciate that. Thank you. It's disorienting for me to speak with somebody who's sideways. And so if somebody like to read number 3, Megan, number 3. This is from Rabbi Nachman of Braslav, and there probably are better sections. My expertise is not Hasidism, but here's somebody who talks about the tzaddik, the righteous person. That is the Rebbe.
For in fact, the tzaddik possesses 2 spirits, a spirit on high and a spirit in this world. This is as it is written, Genesis 6:9. There are chronicles of Noach on high, Noach below. As the Zohar writes concerning this verse in the Tosefta supplement to the portion of Noach. Why does it say Noach twice? However, every living tzaddik has 2 spirits, one spirit in this world and another spirit in the next world. You will find this to be so for all the tzaddikim. See, in other words, the tzaddikim has an aspect of vitality on high and an aspect of vitality in this world. The spirit and vitality from on high is extremely great.
This is just a snapshot. The Torah portion of 2 weeks ago was Ele Toldot Noach ish tzaddik. It's Noach, comma or period, Noach ish tzaddik. So when you take that out of context, you've got Noach appearing twice. A lovely opportunity for Reb Nachman to say, well, and Noach was called an ish tzaddik, a holy person, a righteous person. And it's an opportunity to say, well, there's 2 aspects of the tzaddik, as Rabbi Nachman says. One is the aspect that's down here amongst us. The other is the aspects that's in the higher world. That's part of mysticism of all faith traditions. There's the lower world and the higher world, upper world, and then the mystics and the mystic practice is meant to bring those 2 sections together, lifting this world higher or bringing that world down to us. But here, if I was to draw this, if I was an artist, I would have somehow 2 worlds and then a little man down below. It's the same man, the same person who has 2 aspects, but in some ways being torn, you could see it. And Rabbi Nachman, you may know, was tormented from my teacher, Rabbi Art Green. This was his PhD dissertation, was on Rabbi Nachman, and it's called Tormented Soul. That's the name of the book that was published afterwards of his PhD. And so in some cases, the person is being stretched in both directions, but in some places, and I would say what it seems from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, I've known so many Chabadnikim in my life, and some even close, even now, one of the rabbis out here is a close friend. And the way they talk about the Rebbe, even though he's no longer in this world living, is not so much as somebody being torn, but somebody bringing those worlds together. This is not unique to Judaism. This comes up in societies that go beyond the everyday grind of making a living, eating, making love, doing business, building things, right? The ones who are thinking, parts of societies who are thinking in spiritual ways are looking for this, and especially when there are difficult times, right? Think of how mysticism and mystical approaches and tzaddikim have helped those who are suffering by latching onto, that's not a good word, there's negative, by attaching themselves to, adhering to the word dveikut, to stick to catch a ride with, to whatever, to hug on to, hold on to, whatever verb we might find, to someone who is able to lift their spirits. Then we do that with musicians, we do that with art, we do that in different ways. Sometimes it's charismatic people, and this, of course, comes into the term what is charisma. And I guess that's what I wanted to say here. I said that in this course that I would talk about a little bit about my experience with other religions, most of them up close, this way from a distance with the Dalai Lama. I did not go down to shake his hand or to touch his thing or whatever. That's not what I do in general. And I think, by the way, Brother Roger of Frère Roger of Taizé, The founder of Taizé had very much had it, and Brother Alois as well, who's stepping down next month, of Taizé, have this quality of having you feel that you're in another place and lifting you. I read a book once, a guy, I think it was called Father Joe, this British monk. Did anybody read this book? Who turns out somebody wrote about his own experience. Somebody who was in the TV comedy world had this very special relationship with this monk who was living on an island somewhere off of the UK, and had a very special relationship with him, and just thought we had a very unique relationship with him. And when he came to the funeral, he went out of his way to go to this guy's funeral. He was coming from New York. He had heard he died. He went to the funeral, and he thought there would just be a few people there. And there were hundreds and hundreds of people there who all had the same experience with this Father Joe, but none of the ever knew he was that modest of a person. So I've really been privileged to get to know people and have contact with some from close, some from far away, to read about others that have this quality of being a tzaddik. And it's different than being a prophet, right? The prophet is not always loved. The prophet is the one who says things and says the truth all the time, even when it's uncomfortable. I don't know if the tzaddik does that or not. I'm not well versed enough in Hasidism. I try to read Rabbi Green's works as he comes out with more and more books every year. It's amazing, and you can read his assessment of a particular challenge. We're not going to read it right now. That's in number 4 of Dov Mezrich. Okay, so this brings us from the lofty aspects of, say, meditation and charisma to back to this aspect of Buddhism and idolatry. Let's say it right now. And so what is the I think so many Jewish young people, their exposure to idolatry and to idol worship, known as Avodah Zarah. First of all, when you read the Torah and then you read the books that come after the Torah, that seems to be the biggest problem of the people of Israel, bigger than their enemies, because that has them on God's wrong side is the cheating on God, the disloyalty to God, the betrayal of Adonai, Elohei Yisrael, the one God, by following after the other gods, the little g gods. And that's, as you know, so that comes up a lot in the Torah, comes up even more in Deuteronomy. The Deuteronomist, that's his big thing. And he's the Deuteronomic school is the ones who edited the Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. So Kings, if you've studied Kings, you just know it's this kind of roller coaster, or Judges for that matter. It's this up and down of whether they're idol worshiping or not idol worshiping. Okay. But what is our exposure to idol worship? What are the stories that we learn as children? One of them is the following, which I have to tell you, until I got to Hebrew University, I was pretty sure it was in the Torah. Turns out it's not. So, Sandra, would you like to read? Oh, I just got you to go bite or something. Sorry.
So what did you want me to read?
Number 5 from Breshit Rabbah. Right, this is a rather well-known midrash about Abraham.
Okay, number 5. Oops, I just lost it. Hold on. Midrash Bereshit Rabbah. And Haran died in the presence of his father Terah. Rabbi Haya, the grandson of Rabbi Ada of Yafa, said Tehran was a worshiper of idols. One time he had to travel to a place and he left Abraham in charge of his store. When a man would come in to buy idols, Abraham would ask, "How old are you?" They would reply 50 or 60. Abraham would then respond, "Woe to him who is 60 years old and worships something made today." The customer would be embarrassed and would leave. A woman entered carrying a dish full of flour. She said to him, "This is for you, offer it before them." Abraham took a club in his hands and broke all of the idols and placed the club in the hands of the biggest idol. When his father returned, he asked, "Who did all this?" Abraham replied, "I can't hide it from you. A woman came carrying a dish of flour and told me to offer it before them. I did. And one of them said, I will eat it first. And another said, I will eat it first. The biggest one rose, took a club, and smashed the rest of them. Terah said, what do you think, you can trick me? They don't have cognition. Abraham said, do your ears hear what your mouth is saying?
So I would imagine many of us have heard that story since we were kids in different variations. This is actually it's not the source, but this probably is the oldest version. It's been told and retold in different ways, not always with the flower. The flower is interesting here because of the custom that you find if you've been to a Hindu country or you've visited a Hindu or a Buddhist country, or you've visited a business where the people in that business have those practices, you'll find offerings right in front of a Buddha or in front of other statues of gods from India. I'm not a great expert at any of this, couldn't tell you what it all means. I'm not sure a lot of it does mean. We saw it so Sasha and I were really fortunate and blessed to visit Bali for 3 or 4 weeks years ago when we were in Stockholm. We had some time off. And so we saw, of course, everywhere there were offerings outside of a door, on the window, even the taxi cab or the driver that we had on his front what do you call it, under the window. There was always an offering there with flowers, maybe cigarettes, maybe oranges, different kinds of things. And it's this constant state of something, whereas here it seems ridiculous from this story because that's how it's turned out to be. They're arguing over the flower. There's something quite beautiful about it, something very positive about it. And so when we went to Bali, so we also learned that Bali was in many places synchronistic of Buddhism and Hinduism, that it wasn't clear cut. In fact, we were in one temple that had it was a smaller Buddhist temple, which was surrounded by a larger Hindu temple in the same place. Really, really interesting stuff. And of course, because the priests that are there don't speak English, I was dependent upon our guide, and we got very close to our guide. And our guide, we went to see somebody who was friends of ours from Stockholm in one of the cities, and I didn't say to our guide what we do. He thought we came from Switzerland. We said Sweden, he thought Switzerland. Anyway, once we got to this very wealthy man's house, that we were guests at his house, and the driver was very impressed, but he had a separate conversation that we didn't know about. And after he says, "Oh, I know who you are now. You're the Jewish priest for all of Europe." Now, I happen to have been the rabbi of Stockholm, which some people consider to be the chief rabbi of Sweden, but I certainly wasn't the Jewish priest of all of Europe. But that's kind of, and then whenever we went to a temple, he would tell in whatever language, Balinese, this way, and we would get this special treatment, and it would take us around, and it would offer us oranges or whatever it is. Okay, we had a wonderful, wonderful time. But then towards the end of our stay, he says, "Listen, I'm on." It was almost like he was the shul president. He seemed like he was a head honcho in his village. He says, it's a holiday and we're going to have the ceremony, the purification of the gods. And so, would you like to come? I said, we can come, we're allowed to. He said, well, you can come. You're allowed to come if you dress up like we are. Tourists are not allowed. And so it was Shabbat, and we got a hotel which would be walking distance to his village. And we're going over, we go to his village, and we meet him, and he gives us some, well, why don't I show it on the screen? So it seems silly now when we look at it, but he dressed us up in these clothes. You can see the shirt barely fit me, and we wore these clothes to go to the temple. What also happened was, at the same time, it was that we thought the temple. We just walked from his house to the temple. And he says, I have to go now because I have to organize. They're waiting for me. I'm the organizer. I've got to do something. He says, my brother will take you. So we figured his brother will walk with us to him. And then his brother came. We see that he walks with he had one leg much shorter than the other. He could barely, did not walk. So what he meant, we're going to take it. And it's Shabbat. So I said, Sasha, just flow with it. I know, we can't offend them this way. Just get in the car. Let's go ahead and we'll drive. We weren't driving at the time. Sasha still doesn't travel in a car on Shabbat. And so we go to this, we get into this place and they usher us in, they give us a place, we sit down, everybody's sitting down. There are hundreds of people from this village sitting down, everybody in festive dress. And the gangalang, they're playing, the music is going on. And we could see there were tourists that were standing at the edge and the guards wouldn't let them in because they weren't properly dressed. And also we had this insider guy. So we get to be part, this went on for 2-3 hours at least. And at some point they put, a flower behind our ears and they put something in front of us and sprinkled us with water. And again, both of us were in tears for so much of it, especially when the priest came by and blessed us. We were literally in tears because we could feel that energy. That's kind of my point, that the feeling of it, there was something great going on. We were so fortunate to experience something like this that many Westerners are not able to experience unless they go and live in a place like that. And I remember Sasha saying, I just feel so bad that we drove on Shabbat. And I said, Shabbat? That's your problem? We're surrounded by idols. I mean, a non-Jew drove you in a car on Shabbat, which is so far away from the actual, you're not supposed to burn something on Shabbat. What do you think we're doing here? We had a good laugh on that. And every time we would look around and people would look at us, they'd see our white faces and there would be like a frown, and then they'd see our clothes, you could see them looking at our clothes, and they had a big smile on their face. Like, we felt that we were, again, who knows? It's such a complex culture being a tourist, especially in a place like Bali, which is based on tourism. But to be a tourist in a with all the with all the complexities and social political complexities, but still, it felt to us, we understood that we had honored them in such a way. I know that our driver, who we became friends with, I know that he was terribly, terribly honored by the fact that we would go out our way and come to this thing. By the way, when we got there and we put on the clothes at his house, he says, "Oh, you can come afterwards and join us. We're having a special meal. My wife just made this," and he pulls up a towel that was covering. It was a glazed stuffed little piglet. We said we'll pass on the meal, but thank you. So, apropos getting dressed up and idolatry, I brought the following section from two sections, one from the Mishnah, from the Talmud, and one from Shulchan Aruch. So, Harold, would you read from number 6, Mishnah Avodah Zarah? And let's think about our relationship with idols, per se, and my Buddha's up on the shelf.
Yeah, I'll just get my glasses. I'm sorry, because I had to be got the number 7?
No, number 6 first.
Number 6. Proclos, son of Plosphos, asked Rabban Gamliel in Akko when he was bathing in the bathhouse of Aphrodite. He said to him, "It is written in your Torah, and let none of the condemned cling to your hand. Why then are you bathing in the bathhouse of Aphrodite?" He said to him, One does not respond to halakhic questions in the bathhouse. When he left, he said to him, "I did not come into her territory. She came into my territory. They did not say when they built this bathhouse, 'Let us make a beautiful bathhouse for Aphrodite.' Rather, they said, let us make Aphrodite for the beauty of the bathhouse." Another reason, even if they gave you a lot of money, you would not enter before your idolatry naked and defiled and urinating in front of it. Yet she stands on the sewer pipe and the entire nation urinates in front of her. The verse only applies to their gods. That which he treats like a god is prohibited, and that which he does not treat like a god is permitted.
Interesting, right? It's not, it's a very, it is a famous passage from, and the Talmud goes on back and forth whether Rabban Gamliel was truthful or not truthful, was he deceiving? And that would complicate the issue here. The story itself is interesting because in the world, in the Greco-Roman world, where Jews and rabbis were living and teaching, there was something else going on. There was all this art which was had its roots in idolatry, like it says here. But as Rabban Gamliel says, listen, I didn't come to the temple to pray. I came to a bathhouse, and would you pray in a bathhouse, kind of thing? That's the point of saying I don't speak Torah in the bathhouse, right? To show, this is not a holy place, right? This is an unholy. This is a dirty place, so to speak. And so, so this is an important source when we try to think about what was happening amongst in the first centuries of the Common Era before Christianity became the dominant factor. By the way, in going forward, this explains, which is not so much the topic today, but why you have synagogue mosaic floors, which many of you have seen before, Beit Alpha being the most famous perhaps, but also in Tiberia, Hamat Tiberia, other places. Now there's some spectacular ones from Migdol, all in that area of the Galilee, from synagogues. Some from well, the one in Migdol is different. That's not a good example. The examples are the ones that come afterwards with the horoscope, the signs of the horoscope with Helios, the sun god, on the floor of the mosaic, on the floor of the synagogue in Beit Alpha. Whereas in the beginning, some people thought maybe there were synchronistic Jews. They believed in this and believed in that. And while that's possibly true, the preferred explanation from my point of view is at some point they were no longer considered to be idolaters, the same way that I don't think people think they're idol worshiping when they look to the zodiac, to the horoscope in the newspaper, or have pictures up on the walls of people and things like that. These things kind of change from time to time. So if we have a statue of the Buddha in our house, it's something that reminds us of a place we've been. It's something that feels at a very superficial way of connecting with a huge population around the world. I was with, many of you know, Rabbi Eli Spitz, and he and I once went to an exhibit. Perhaps some of you who live in Orange County saw it. It was in Santa Ana. It was an exhibit of Tibetan holy art at the Santa Ana Museum. I think there's a place called that, right? But it wasn't sponsored by the Tibetan community of the Dalai Lama. It was sponsored by the Chinese government. So perhaps it was a little controversial. Should it be boycotted or not? The two of us did go, and we spent hours there together. It was like chevruta, like studying together text. And when we got to the god of what, I don't know the names of the gods, but the god, or one of the gods that has like 8, 9 arms on both sides, you know what I mean? Those guys, the guys. Mm-hmm. I said, Eli, and I spent a long time looking, meditating on in front of this God, not praying to, but trying to understand. I said, Eli, I don't think this is avodah zarah. I don't think this is the idol worship which Chazal were talking about. He says, well, how can you say that? I said, because this God, everything about it says motion. This God is in motion. Those arms, you can see the motion going on all the time, as opposed to the class God that in the biblical world is Baal, that we have examples of, the rain, the fertility and rain god with a spear in his hand or a lightning bolt in his hand, which has been broken, but it is frozen. The other gods, they're just frozen. The art here tells me motion. He disagreed, but I still kind of hold on to that a little bit. So between the idols and the clothes, I just bring the section here. I just had when I was doing the research for this particular meeting today, I couldn't resist bringing this one here. You want to read for us, Matthew? You up for reading?
Sure. Where
so number 7. This is from the Shulchan Aruch, 16th century, 16/17th century. It was many of you know, Rabbi Yosef Karo wrote this. Rabbi Yosef Karo and Rabbi Moshe Isserlich wrote parallel kind of works. At some point, it was blended together into one edition, the edition we use of the Shulchan Aruch today, and that's what you have here. The first, where it says Ramah, that means Rabbi Moshe Isserlich. Go ahead. Number 7.
Are you going to put it up? Oh, wait a minute. Do I have it?
Would you like me to put it up?
I got it. Okay. One should not follow the customs of non-Jews. One should not wear clothing that is particular to them. One should not grow forelocks on one's head like the forelocks on their heads. One should not shave the sides of one's head and grow one's hair in the middle of one's head like they do. One should not shave the hair in front of one's face from ear to ear and let one's hair grow in the back like they do. One should not build buildings, like the non-Jews' temple, so that large groups of people will enter them, like non-Jews do.
Okay, let's take a break. That's Rabbi Yosef
Mhm.
Karo, okay? Tzfat, 16th century. So, you know, the thing with payas, right? This is from that same, it's based on a biblical verse, but this is what his time, so the galachs, the monks, friars would have a certain shave kind of a thing. That's what I don't know what friars mean, but a friars, yes, it was Bauer's Museum. Friars in Hebrew is called a galach, one who shaves one's head. That has to do with the beard, all those kinds of things, but also one's clothes, which I find, I mean, we actually did wear those clothes in order to get into the temple itself. And then don't build a building like they do, which is exactly what happened in the 19th century when Jews began to build synagogues that were very similar to it even beforehand, but especially in the 19th century, we formed synagogues that were very similar in their architecture to churches as well. Okay, I'm not saying this is not judgmental. I'm just putting this up as something out. This is what many in Orthodoxy will turn to these kinds of this kind of divorce. But let's see what Ramah says about it. Go ahead, Matthew. Rabbi Moshe Isserlich. Ramah.
Rather, one should be distinct from them in one's manner of dress and in all of one's actions. But they are accustomed to wearing red
But
clothes.
all of this.
Oh, wait, I skipped one, right? But all of this apply to things that non-Jews do for the sake of licentiousness. For example, they are accustomed to wearing red clothing, which is official princely clothing, and other clothing that is similarly immodest. These restrictions also apply to things that they are accustomed to doing because of a custom or rule that does not have a reason out of concern that a Jew who does such things will follow the ways of the Amorites. And that is the blemish of idol worship inherited from their ancestors, but things that they are accustomed to doing for a useful purpose, such as their custom for expert doctors to wear particular clothing so that the doctors will be recognized as specialists. One is permitted to wear such clothing. Similarly, things that are not done out of respect or another reason, it is permitted.
So, not that I consulted the Shulchan Aruch before we put on those clothes. I was no longer in that mindset to do, but I do like to look at the source and see to reflect upon them. And I didn't bring the next paragraph talks about other reasons why you could possibly wear the clothes of a non-Jew. You understand from this why Haredim wear the clothes they do. Not that those clothes were originally, those clothes the Haredim wore were non-Jewish clothes, but at some point when they fell out of fashion, especially a shtreimel or a spodik, the big fur hats, then they held on to it to make it became a particularly Jewish kind of a thing. And so there's something anachronistic about it. But I do hear in this, though, there's the exceptions for these when there's an issue of respect. And for me, it felt, from Sasha and myself, it felt like we were giving these folks in this little village respect. And there was a moment of unity. Now, again, it could be silly white folks, tourist mentality. I understand all that, you know. But for us, though, it was very meaningful. It's experiences we go back to, and I think have enriched us. I understood more about purification, what needed to be done. They brought all the idols from the temple down to the seaside. That's what was happening. I understood what it means to be blessed by a priest in a way which is different, but reminiscent of when I was still in a more personally naive stage development when the Kohanim would do Birkat Kohanim. And so we cherish those experiences, and that's the little bit that I've had to do with my life and other things, but these are the more colorful ones. I want to show you one more picture before we look at this last source, and we're actually going to finish on time today, but And this keeps coming up, this guy, this Joshua text, sorry, that's for. Oh, no, I don't want to do this. Apologies, apologies, apologies. Oh, let's see, there we go.
Wow.
Can you see, does anybody identify what we're looking at?
One huge bamboo tree, me.
Not bamboo, a banyan tree.
Oh,
Uh-huh.
banyan. Yes, quite
Yeah.
right.
At the bottom, there's these fabrics which are part of the worship. For this, there are a number of these, I think, Anhu, but this is particularly large one. You don't get the full scope of it here, but our guide, knowing that we were interested in religious things, brought us to this. We went way out of our way to get to this in the middle of the through rice fields and rainforest, and it's a patch of rainforest that has this in the center of it. It's been preserved. It's a holy tree, and the cloths that are there and the signs and the gate all have to do with the fact that it's a temple of sorts as well. So there's tree worship that's talked about in the Torah, the Asherah worship and other kinds, and so when you see something like this, it's not just watching from the outside, but if you have a chance to go inside, because if you've ever seen one of these trees, it's not a regular kind of a trunk that we think of, a sequoia tree, where it's just really large, or not even like a redwood tree where somebody has hollowed out the middle and you can walk through, that kind of thing. There are folds and folds of the outside part of the tree that create inner passageways. So in this area here, there's places to walk around, to squeeze through. And I say this because both Sasha and I, when we were in the midst of this banyan tree, this holy tree, we could feel it pulsate. We could feel the energy. For me, it was a hum. And it's interesting. Sasha had a different experience, but when we talked to the guide about it, he says, "Oh, that's interesting. I never nobody's ever said it before." I think perhaps we were attuned, but for me, I felt the life force of this huge ancient tree. I was almost in the middle of it. I was kind of in a crevice. It was an amazing experience, and I'm happy I had the experience because I understand why someone would worship that. Now, which brings us to my final point about Hinduism. People will often say, yes, well, they have a God for this and a God for that. Every Hindu I have ever spoken, I've been on many panels over the years with Hindus, they all say the exact same thing. Again, I'm not a scholar of Hinduism, don't know what the ancient texts present themselves, but every Hindu, remember Krister Stendhal's rules that you have to hear from the religion from the person who practices it, that's the way to do it, have always said the same thing. We believe in the one God, just expressed in many different characters of gods. That's how we express it. I think it's something for us to think about before we go and, as Jews, as traditional Jews, if we go and judge right away. To me, and that's in my mind as well. These are all expressions, different paths, if you will, up to the same top of the mountain. And what I'd like to end with today is, it's not the best of the text that I could get, but and this is our segue back to next week as well. For those, though, for whom avodah zarah, idolatry, an entire tractate about it is still verboten, it's still a taboo. Then comes the question: well, Islam, everybody agrees. Every rabbinic view that I know, again, I haven't checked everything, it says Islam is not avodah zarah because it's very, very specifically about the one God, about Allah. And there is no other God other than Allah. There's so much that's part of a central part of the prayer. There is no other God, la ilaha, right? There is no other God than Allah. And so then the question comes to Christianity. And when we think of Christianity today, those of us that have contact with, especially with progressive partners in the church, we don't think of idol worship at all. Even if we see an icon in a church, we don't take that as worshiping the icon. The truth is that's not what icons are for. They're not for bowing down to the icon, thinking the icon has the power. Icons were meant to be and are by those who use them, and I know this because those who use them, I've spoken with them. Again, back to that cardinal rule of interfaith dialogue. are in order to help one in one's prayer, help one commune. And so the famous passage, there are others, but the most famous rabbi, Rabbi Menachem ben Shlomo Meiri, who has extensive commentaries on the Talmud, really, really useful commentaries in Talmud, Provence, 13th, 14th century. Even if their faith is different from ours, says the Meiri, about Christianity. And this is before, right, Luther. This is the Roman Catholic Church. That's what he knows, right? They do not belong to the category of idolaters. They believe in the existence of God, the Blessed One, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and God's uniqueness and omnipotence, even if in some respects, from the point of view of our faith, they incur some errors. Okay, that's magnanimous of them. Yeah, it's not that we think that they're right; they're wrong, on the wrong path, but it's not idolatry. In our time, in the majority of cases, even if sometimes they share oaths in the names of important dead personages, right? Saints, this worship of saints, because there is a saint worship. Again, not so much in the Protestant parts of it, but in the Catholic Orthodox Church, they nonetheless do not consider them deities. And thus, there is no idolatry. Now, people will, anybody who deals with interfaith dialogue will often waive the Meiri's, we're not finishing on time, I'm sorry. The Meiri's words. I don't need the Meiri to tell me that I can do this, but I think it's important to show that even amongst classical, traditional, very authoritative figures, there were those that had a different view about Catholicism, about Christianity, even before there was something called Catholicism. In that sense, it was just the church. And that gives us a segue into what we're going to do next week, where I'd like to share with you really the greatest hits of the last 8 weeks of what I feel that we've been able to accomplish here in Palm Springs, myself and my colleagues. Oh, I didn't leave any time for comments or questions today. Did anybody want to say something or ask something?
Well, I do want to thank you, Rabbi, for coming and teaching us once again. Very fascinating conversation. And every time I hear you on these interfaith subjects, I will say it again and again, is that you really give us hope for the world and for coming together in a way that when we separate ourselves, we might not have that. So,
okay, so see everybody next week.
all right. Come back next week. Thank you all for being here.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.